we'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond, but they should respond proportionally.
There seems to be a general acceptance from the U.S. and the other G7 nations that Israel will respond to this Iranian missile attack. But what are they saying about the possibility of an all-out war in the Middle East? I'm Ellison Barber in for Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. Tonight, Israel and Iran are threatening a direct and prolonged war with one another. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowing that Iran will pay for a wave of missile attacks. Yesterday, Iran launched some 200 missiles at Israel. Those flashes of lights right there, those are some of the missiles raining down on Israel. Most of them were intercepted by Israeli and U.S. air defenses. Our NBC News team has been on the ground to witness the aftermath. Here's some of what our colleague Raf Sanchez saw.
I want to walk you through the scene here. This is where one of those 181 Iranian ballistic missiles came crashing down. This was a 10-foot crater. It has now been filled up by Israeli work crews.
And Iran has responded to Israel's threat, saying that they will counter with greater force if Israel persists. The United Nations held a Security Council briefing today on the situation, where the Secretary General, in no uncertain terms, condemned all of the violence happening in this region.
Time to stop the sickening cycle of escalation after escalation that is leading the people of the Middle East straight over the cliff. Each escalation has served as a pretext for the next. This deadly cycle of tit-for-tat violence must stop. Time is running out.
Those words coming as Hezbollah fighters and the Israeli military engaged in deadly battles in southern Lebanon today. Israel saying that 8 of their soldiers have now been killed there, with Lebanese authorities saying that the violence has claimed over 1,000 lives so far. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more on all of it from Tel Aviv. Hey, Aaron.
Well, the region is collectively holding its breath, waiting for Israel's response to what Israeli military officials say was the largest ballistic missile attack in this state's history. 180 missiles launched from Iran toward Israel. According to an Israeli official, the response will be swift and stronger than what we saw play out in April. If you remember, in April, Iran at the time launched 120 to 130 missiles on Israel. Israel responded with an attack on an Iranian airbase, though never publicly claiming responsibility for that attack. Iran then brushed it off. This time is expected to be different. The response from Israel, given that 180 missiles were fired, expected to be stronger. Meanwhile, it was a bloody day in southern Lebanon for the Israeli military. At least 8 Israeli soldiers were killed in 2 incidents there near the border. Those cross-border raids, an operation that Israel says is ongoing. According to a Hezbollah official, Hezbollah fighters ambushed the Israeli soldiers inside of a village. He said that Hezbollah is now vowing to continue this fight against Israel, and there are real concerns now about the potential for further escalation. Back to you.
All right, joining us now is NBC News military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Steph Twitty. He is also the former deputy commander of United States European Command. Lieutenant General, it is a pleasure to have you here tonight to give us some insight as we watch this sort of what feels like a cycle of tit-for-tat retaliation in the Middle East. The U.S., they are saying they expect its ally here, Israel, to respond to Iran's attack yesterday. This is what former U.S. Defense Secretary William Cohen said about it earlier today.
I believe that the Israelis will take this opportunity and use the chance they have right now to inflict far more serious damage on Iran than ever before.
What do you think, given your experience in this region and military background, that Israel's response could look like? What would the U.S. potentially support? And do you think there is still this constant, I guess in the scale of how high are we to a regional war? How much higher could we go here?
Yeah, first, good to be with you. First of all, let me just say we have been in a regional war for quite some time. If you think about the countries that have been involved in this war, it makes it a regional war. From Yemen to Lebanon to Israel to Iraq to Syria, Iran, absolutely the U.S. and coalition forces against the Houthis in the Red Sea as well. And so it is, in fact, a regional war. Now it's all about how far will this war escalate, given that the Iranians have attacked Israel. And I will tell you, I see Israel responding pretty seriously here because they view the Iranians as an existential threat, meaning a threat to Israel and their existence. And so I believe the Iranians will strike back. They'll strike back hard. I think they'll go after the nuclear capability, certainly the ballistic missiles that came raining down on them on yesterday, and they'll go after the Iran Republican Guard that's located in Syria and in Iraq. Now, whether or not the U.S. will support, we are obligated and we're committed to the defense of Israel. So I think we'll support there. And I believe we'll support in some intelligence. I do not see U.S. boots on the ground or involvement with strikes in Iran, but I do see that we'll continue to support their defense.
Why do you feel so confident at this point that the U.S. might not put boots on the ground? I mean, is Israel capable of fighting such a large war on their own? I mean, they're now fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas inside of Gaza. There are difficulties in the West Bank with Israeli settlers and civilians that live there. And then now also Iran. I mean, how could the Israeli military do that without more physical on-the-ground support from the United States?
Well, let me just lay it out for you. Take a look at what they've done so far. In the great scheme of things, they've been fighting a three-front war. And so they've been fighting in Hamas, and they have decimated Hamas. They're still in existence with Hamas, no doubt. They've been fighting in Hezbollah. You've seen what they've done to dismantle the senior leadership. And now they're going after limited operations to push out the ballistic missiles, the missiles and the rockets and so forth that's been firing into northern Israel. And the reach they had to go after the Houthis. And so when you take a look at the superpower in the region, you have the Israelis that no doubt have the capability to conduct offensive operations. And you have Iran, of course, that has a pretty significant military. And so Israel has demonstrated that they can handle the multitude of Iran and their proxies. So I think that based on the situation as I see it now, there'll be no need for the U.S. to put U.S. boots on the ground.
All right, Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, thank you so much. Let's continue this conversation with Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Aaron David Miller. He also served as an advisor to several secretaries of state. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Just pick up, if you can, for us where Lieutenant General Twitty left off there. When we're talking about what happens next here and what U.S. involvement could look like if we really see Israel and Iran directly engaging in warfare. What do you think happens in 2-3 months?
I mean, I think the next step is clearly going to be an Israeli response, and it's going to be comprehensive and severe. Whether they go after the nuclear facilities at Natanz and other places, unclear. I think not. I think that they will go after the launchers, the ballistic missile sites. They'll go after command and control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They may decide to hit economic targets, oil exporting facilities. And I think at that point, we're talking about the Iranian response. We are not necessarily headed for what the Middle East has never experienced before, which is a multi-front war, not with the deployment of large numbers of ground forces, but with AI, cyber, drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. on a number of fronts. It could be a devastating and catastrophic confrontation. We're not there yet, but clearly we're moving up the escalatory ladder.
Can you talk to us a little more about what a war with Iran could possibly look like in terms of their capabilities? There's some discussion about a different type of missile being used in this latest launch that people hadn't seen before that could have potentially evaded Israel's Iron Dome system. Just from a pure weapons standpoint, what's Iran's capabilities versus Israel at this point?
The Iranians have about 3,000 ballistic missiles, but of varying quality and precision. They did use, according to the IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps sources, they claimed a hypersonic missile, but many ballistic missiles have that characteristic as well. It's the real question is the difficulties that even a multi-layered air defense system like Israel has, Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow, which is the air defense that took down most of the 180-plus ballistic missiles that the Iranians launched. The real danger is a saturation attack, where you have so much redundancy. Hezbollah, for example, had with the capacity with their high trajectory weapons of firing 3,000 missiles a day. That would prove almost impossible for Israel to stop, and it would target population centers and major infrastructure. But there's simply no comparison between the formidable power the Israelis can deploy vis-a-vis Iran, not to mention American firepower. So I think if the Israelis strike hard and strike big, I suspect the Iranians will respond. The question is, at that point, where we go from there.
And on that note, very quickly before we let you go, do you think there is a possibility at all for a diplomatic off-ramp, or are we too far gone?
No, the time for talking right now is over. I'm afraid, sadly, for the people of the region, this is about shooting.
All right. Aaron David Miller, thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And the war between Israel and Hamas, it of course continues with no apparent end in sight, a year now. And in an exclusive interview with NBC News, Hamas is opening up about the war. And the militant group says they do feel supported by Iran after being disappointed by other Arab countries in the region. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons has this report.
Less than 24 hours after Iran attacked Israel, the Iranian president touched down here in Qatar on a diplomatic drive to win international support as the conflict between the two nations escalates. The Iran-backed militia that lit the fuse for Israel's war in Gaza and this broader conflict is also here. Iran said last night's strike was in part retribution for the killing of a Hamas leader. But Iran waited 2 months, only responding after more assassinations. So today, we asked a senior Hamas official whether his group feels isolated.
Iran finally, last night, launched less than 200 missiles. Are you disappointed by the support or reaction that you've seen from Iran?
It is a war crime to assassinate the top negotiator of Hamas, regardless in Tehran, in Beirut. It is their decision how to do it, operational decision, logistical decision, how to do it.
I mean, would you expect more support from Iran?
Look, we are expecting support not only from the Iranians, we are expecting some support from anyone in the region.
Will the Iranians meet with Hamas while in the country, we asked?
Still, I have no idea about any arrangements.
Almost 12 months since Hamas launched its October 7th attacks, tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza are dead, including battalions of Hamas fighters and civilians. Now, as the war moves to Lebanon, where Hezbollah is based, and even Iran, he says there have not been serious negotiations for a ceasefire deal with Israel since early July.
Israel estimates there are 101 hostages still in Gaza and that at least half of them are still alive. If you say that you want a solution, why don't you release those people?
I don't know exactly how many captured Israelis in the Gaza Strip, 101, 120, I don't know.
You don't know how many there are?
No, I don't know how many there, how many of them are alive.
How can that be, though, after 12 months?
They are in different areas,
Even now?
with different groups, in a very complicated security situation. I have to respect my own people and to say that at the time we have 100 or 120 captured Israelis, we have thousands of Palestinians who were kidnapped from their houses in the Gaza Strip by Israeli soldiers. They are living in Sidi Man or other Israeli jails in a very inhuman conditions.
Many of the men who lead Hamas and Hezbollah, both groups supported by Iran, are dead. Yet amid the terrible bloodshed, Hamas still believes it is winning. There were reports last month that its leader, Yahya Sinwar, the brains behind October 7th, was dead. Not true, he says.
Is Yahya Sinwar still alive?
Sure.
When was the last time Hamas here in Qatar communicated with him?
We are communicating with our leadership generally, regularly. I cannot now say when exactly, with whom, but...
He's alive, but he can't communicate because he'd be killed.
What I know that he is still alive, he is still in control, he is still communicating with his people on the ground, he's still communicating with the leadership outside.
Was October 7th a strategic mistake?
For us, after 1 year after October 7th, we consider October 7th as a strategic achievement.
Achievement?
Yes, yes.
Our thanks to Keir Simmons for that report. Okay, some new developments out of Washington tonight in special counsel Jack Smith's case against former President Donald Trump. A new brief filed by Smith's office in the election interference case has been unsealed to the public, and it argues that Trump, quote, resorted to crimes to try to stay in office after he lost the 2020 election. It also makes the case that Trump was fundamentally acting as a private citizen for office when he did it. It is a clear response to the Supreme Court's ruling that presidents have absolute criminal immunity for official acts in office. Let's bring in NBC's justice reporter Ryan Riley to break it all down for us. Ryan, what are your biggest takeaways from this brief? Did anything surprise you?
You know, I think one of the debates is whether or not Donald Trump actually believes some of the lies that he was spreading about the 2020 election at the time, or if he didn't, if he was purposely spreading those falsehoods just to try to overturn the election. And what Jack Smith argues pretty extensively and with a lot of evidence in this filing is that that Donald Trump knowingly lied about the election. You know, you've seen a lot of these January 6th defendants who, of course, you saw at the Capitol there on January 6th yourself, who've now gone into court and basically told judges that they really feel like naive idiots for believing Donald Trump in the first place. And so that's how that's played out for them. But for Donald Trump, he's maintained all along he actually truly believed these. And in fact, last night during the debate, his vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, couldn't bring himself to admit that Donald Trump did, in fact, lose the 2020 election. So it's become this really like pillar of the Republican Party in some ways. And what this really lays out here, I think that Jack Smith is making the case, is that Donald Trump knew this. All of his campaign officials knew this. They told him this over and over and over again. And of course, the reason this all came about was because of that Supreme Court ruling on a presidential immunity, which basically means that now Jack Smith has to focus on questions of whether or not Donald Trump committed something personally or whether he did it or whether he was doing it as an official act as president. That's the kind of evidence that they can't include in this case, Ellison.
Okay, so logistically speaking, what is likely to happen next? Can a judge just look at this filing and say, okay, let's move ahead with the case in D.C., or will this likely head back to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so I think the Supreme Court is likely where this is ultimately going to end up. Again, I think there'll be at least one more round this next year when this case sort of bubbles its way back up. But of course, all this is dependent upon what happens, you know, in 30-some days during the actual election. And we've been set up in this new scenario now where Donald Trump has already been saying those same cities that he told his supporters to focus on back in 2020, those same cities that he told his supporters to focus on in 2016, even back during Mitt Romney's race, he was still claiming that there was some sort of mass election fraud. That's what he was saying just as recently as this week, saying Sunday that there's going to be all this fraud. He said the only reason he needed to be in Pennsylvania Pennsylvania was because there was going to be all this fraud in Philly that he wouldn't even have to campaign there otherwise. So either way, it's sort of a, heads I win, tails you lose scenario for him. He's going to end up doing the same thing that he's done now for like 3 election cycles, saying that he won the election even if he loses. So that's sort of, I think, what is now being set up. But the question is whether or not this case continues, and that will all be determined on Election Day, and then followed by that, the Supreme Court, if Donald Trump, in fact, loses.
All right, Ryan Riley, thank you. We appreciate it. Let's head now to the latest in the race for the White House, because both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, they spent the day touring storm-ravaged areas of the Southeast, while the vice presidential nominees, they returned to the campaign trail after their debate last evening. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has all of the details. Gabe?
Ellison, coming off that remarkably civil and cordial debate, both vice presidential candidates kicked off a travel blitz. Tonight, a triple threat is looming over the presidential campaign. The rising tensions in the Middle East, a deadlocked port strike threatening to raise prices.
We're hearing from the folks regionally that they're having trouble getting product they need because of the port strike.
And the devastating aftermath of Hurricane Helene.
There's a lot of work that's going to need to happen over the coming days, weeks, and months.
Late today, Vice President Harris visiting the storm zone in Battleground, Georgia, 2 days after former President Trump went there. Her trip coming after last night's debate, where J.D. Vance and Tim Walz remained civil while attacking each other's running mates.
Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade.
You've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens.
Walz struggling when pressed about his past claim that he was visiting China during the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, when in fact he did not arrive until months later.
I've not been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times. All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this, so I will just... That's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
While tonight, the Harris campaign is highlighting Vance's refusal to acknowledge Trump lost the 2020 election.
And I would just ask that, did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
President Biden's name was mentioned just 7 times last night. It comes after NBC News reported Biden has privately complained his name and accomplishments have virtually disappeared from the national conversation. Ellison?
Gabe Gutierrez at the White House, thank you. Don't go anywhere, because we are just getting started. Up next, we're going to head to North Carolina and Tennessee, where millions of people are still feeling the effects of Hurricane Helene. We'll tell you what's being done to get those residents food, water, and power as soon as possible. Plus, unbelievable new video in the shooting death of a judge in Kentucky. NBC's Adrian Broaddus has new details on what led the local sheriff to open fire inside of the judge's chambers. And later this hour, you can buy chips, you can buy soda, even candy from a vending machine. But how about bullets? That is what's happening in some small towns right now. Our Priscilla Thompson has the story in tonight's Future of Everything.
What do you think of the machine?
I'm a gun owner. I'm all for it. And I think anytime that children have access to something, it's just not a good idea.
Welcome back. We will head to North Carolina in a moment for the latest on the recovery from Hurricane Helene. But first, here are some of the other headlines that we are watching tonight. Federal prosecutors are considering even more charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Adams made his second court appearance today. He was indicted last week on bribery and wire fraud charges. He's pleaded not guilty and is refusing to step down as mayor. Sean Diddy Combs was hit with 120 new sexual assault allegations. They date back more than 20 years. A lawyer representing the accuser says he's going to be filing lawsuits, and Diddy's legal team, they are calling them false. But Combs is currently detained after New York prosecutors charged him with sex trafficking. He's pleaded not guilty to those charges. Michael Jordan's racing team is going after NASCAR, suing the league and its CEO. They're alleging anti-competitive practices, basically saying there's too much control and no room to make a profit. The antitrust case is trying to create more opportunities for teams, sponsors, and fans. Stellantis is recalling a ton of Jeep hybrids over a fire risk. Over 150,000 Jeeps are impacted. Plug-in Grand Cherokees and Wrangler models can apparently catch fire even while the car is parked. The company says owners should park them outside until they have been repaired. So far, 2 people have been hurt. A U.S. bomb likely dropped during World War II just exploded at an airport in Japan. The whole place was shut down, and you can see some of the damage there. The explosion caused a crater more than 20 feet wide right on the runway. About 90 flights were canceled, but thankfully, no one was hurt. Nearly a week after Hurricane Helene devastated the southeast, many areas are struggling to recover. At least 183 people have been killed across 6 states, with hundreds more still missing. More than 1 million people without power still. As the days go on, we are seeing more and more of just how hard hit North Carolina was impacted. Several communities are now cut off. Others just seem to be wiped out entirely. People are running out of much needed food and supplies, making things even harder. They're really not able to communicate.
We don't know where water is available. I know it's available, but we don't have any means of finding out where it is. We don't have cell service. We don't have internet. The radio is the only way that we're getting any kind of information. So that's been the hardest part for me. It's just not, the resources are there, just where are they?
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is on the ground in North Carolina tonight, and he has the latest. Sam?
Ellison, good evening. For the outlying parts here of Buncombe County, North Carolina, it's devastation on a whole new scale. It took them days just to clear the mud out of the roads to make them passable. There is still mud right now inside of mailboxes, and that, as a timeline for addressing the water crisis, remains murky. For the saturated and stunned residents of Swannanoa, North Carolina.
There's 6 inches of just the wettest, sludgiest mud that you can think of across the whole house.
Finding even small keepsakes.
This is the first picture we're taken with my grandfather and my youngest daughter, Celeste.
Can be massive moral victories.
These are things you can't get back. There's no amount of FEMA that will put these pictures back.
This working class neighborhood accessible now for the first time as some roads have opened up and community needs crystallizing like the eye of a storm.
I think the hardest thing right now is there's no power, there's no water, cell service is spotty at best.
With roads destroyed, mules are carrying food to some cut-off communities.
If you have like different family members across the community and you can't reach them, you don't know if they're okay.
All of this against the backdrop of a death toll quickly rising, with more than 90 killed in North Carolina as President Biden took an aerial tour Wednesday. Every single X that you see on a car or structure is the sign of something searched. There are 1, 2, 3 vehicles here, 1 shed, that makes 4, and countless other structures that can't even be accessed. The roofs on some homes punctured by people escaping as those injured are facing untenable conditions at some hospitals.
Everything people see on the news, it's worse in person. It's worse.
Hannah Drummond works at Mission Hospital in Asheville, where she says 200 patients have been placed in an ER meant for 100.
They ran out of food for us on Saturday, so the patients and the staff in the ER weren't eating. When you can't use the toilets, that means I have to find a commode and I have to find a biohazard bag or some kind of receptacle.
HCA Health, which oversees the hospital, has not responded to multiple NBC News requests for comment. In eastern Tennessee, a host of neighborhoods remain inaccessible and in dire need of help. Today, a vital lifeline for some as Army Black Hawk helicopters drop supplies to communities still cut off. And back in North Carolina,
God bless you.
More heartbreak at the food banks. Tanya Peterson telling our Antonia Hilton her grandkids had not eaten in days.
We're running what little gas we got out of a junk car for the generator to be able to heat the bottles up for the babies. It's terrible. We've got people looting for gas coming through your yards. It's awful. It's awful. No one's come to check on us. No one.
And with all of these challenges going on at the same time, Ellison, another blow to residents today as the county updated its water situation by saying that both the treatment side and delivery systems involving water distribution have both been catastrophically damaged. They cannot even give a timeline to residents as to when this will be fixed. On a positive note, at least the county says they had 400 welfare check requests. That number is now down to 4. Ellison, back to you.
Sam Brock, thank you. Meanwhile, Tennessee's National Guard is working around the clock to help people in that state impacted by Helene. Communities also saw devastating floodwaters, with some areas still unable to call for help. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky joins us now from Irwin, Tennessee. Morgan, you have been there reporting throughout the day. Talk to us about what you are seeing on the ground right now. What are you hearing from people in that community?
Oh, well, I have to tell you that there's a lot of frustration in that here we are multiple days in, and there are still communities that are cut off after dropping so much rain here so quickly that the floodwater simply washed roads or bridges away. We do know that help is on the way. We've seen multiple Army Blackhawks flying supplies in and out of those hard-to-reach areas, and we had a chance to tag along with some of the Tennessee Army National Guard today that loaded up these massive trucks with supplies that went very quickly here at these donation centers. We do know that as it stands right now, power and water is slowly being restored. But for the folks who live here, this is hitting about as deep as it can. I want you to hear from what one resident shared with us earlier today. Take a listen.
Some people don't have cell service. They don't have the ability to be able to contact us or contact higher ups or get the word out, hey, we need help. That's why we are trying to find out where we need to go as fast as we can get there.
There are towns that tonight are one way in, one way out, and it's been washed out.
Yes, and we don't know that yet because we're still trying to find where they are and who needs it.
And that member of the Tennessee National Guard, it's interesting how uniquely impacted they are. Obviously here to serve, Ellison, but they live in this area or relatively nearby. And so to be impacted in that way and then, see just how vast an area has been hit by this storm is very heartbreaking for a lot of them.
Yeah. And Morgan, I know there is also an investigation that seems to be growing related to allegations against a plastics company where several workers died. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Ellison, this is a factory in neighboring Unicoi County. We're in Carter County, but not too far away from where we are. This is a factory now under incredible scrutiny because about 11 or so, we believe, employees were killed as a result of rising waters there. Families of those employees that have since deceased say that they weren't let out in time to reach higher ground, and as such, the company is at least partially responsible for some of those deaths. We have two statements I'd like to share with you. The first being the launch of this investigation by the AG here, saying that I spoke with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and requested that they look into allegations involving Impact Plastics in Unicoi County. Specifically, I asked that they review the occurrences of Friday, September 27th to identify any potential criminal violations there. Meanwhile, regarding Impact Plastics, they're saying this tonight, that they are aware of this ongoing investigation, but they have not been contacted. But they do promise to cooperate fully. The company conducting its own internal review of events and timelines of September 27th, and we'll share the information once that review is complete. So you have both sides kind of going back and forth here, Ellison, but that happened in real time, in person, at a press conference earlier today, and we have an exchange I'd like you to hear. Take a listen.
It's the 5th day, and all we hear is we're working on it. We're working on it.
If I had news of someone who was deceased that was your family, I would be calling.
The reason it takes so long for us to have answers is because we want to make sure that when we give it, it's the 100% truth.
So a lot of emotions there in that press conference in Unicoi County. Meanwhile, back here in Carter County, Ellison, if there is any silver lining to this tragedy, it is the fact that about 36 hours ago, there were 60 people reported missing in this county. Tonight, that number is sitting at 3. Authorities credit that in large part to crews that were able to really walk these damaged areas, make contact with those that were missing, and in many cases, it was simply no cell phone service, but they confirmed those individuals doing okay tonight. Ellison?
All right, a little bit of good news. Our thoughts go out to all of those families there. And Morgan, thank you for your reporting. We really appreciate it. Coming up, a TikTok star behind bars in Texas. His connection to a man found several states away. The mounting questions tonight. But first, you gotta see this. How far does a father's love go? Well, for one South Carolina dad, it's nearly 30 miles, at least. David Jones, he traveled 27 miles, 17 of them on foot, to make sure he was there to walk his daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. What would have been a 2-hour car ride turned into a 12-hour trek due to the difficult road conditions in the wake of Hurricane Helene. Weathering debris, covered roads, damaged bridges, and state troopers telling him to turn around. Jones made it to the church right on time. Talk about a determined dad. We'll be right back. We have an update tonight on the death of Friends star Matthew Perry. One of the 2 doctors charged in the investigation of his death has cut a deal with federal prosecutors. Today, 54-year-old Mark Chavez pleaded guilty to conspiring to distribute ketamine to Perry. He has agreed to no longer practice medicine and relinquished his passport while free on bond. Chavez is one of 5 people charged in connection with Perry's accidental overdose. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Angela Cinadella for more on this case and this plea deal in particular. Let's just start with where things are right now. To hear one person strike a plea deal, but there's another doctor involved. Other names have been talked about a lot in this investigation. Where does it go from here, and are you surprised to see this plea deal?
So it's certainly bad news for the 2 remaining defendants who have not struck plea deals. So 3 out of the 5 defendants have pled guilty, and the 2 remaining have pled not guilty. But this certainly places a lot more pressure on them to take any plea deal if it's on the table, not only because it's another insider talking, but also because this is a conspiracy charge. And to prove that charge, the government has to prove that there was an agreement between more than one person to commit a crime. Now, obviously here there is so much digital evidence that we've seen through the indictment, just so many text messages, but also it really helps the government to have someone verify and validate those, someone who was there. Now, this doctor who has pled guilty is the one who seems to have procured the ketamine to kind of start this to begin with, to start the entire conspiracy.
Do you think the other 2 will now change course? I mean, I know you said it puts them in a difficult position, but are you surprised, given some of the digital evidence you referenced, that they haven't already made that decision and their lawyers haven't gone in and said, hey, how do we work something out?
Yeah, so look, prosecutors can offer plea deals, but they don't have to. So it's possible they would want to go to trial with this if they believe that their evidence is strong enough. It's also possible they can't come to an agreement based on whatever concessions that the defendants want there. So plea deals aren't always guaranteed from either side, but it is possible they could still even plead guilty without a plea deal, just knowing that there is so much evidence against them.
And in terms of Chavez, who pled guilty today, he was expected to face a minimum of 10 years in prison. Is that something that could change, or what do we expect to happen next?
Yeah, so we expect it to be reduced because in the plea deal, it was outlined that the prosecutors, in exchange for the full and honest cooperation of the defendant, would then request a reduction of that sentence to the judge. Now, look, that's not guaranteed for 2 reasons. One, the judge is the only one who can determine the sentencing here, so that judge could either listen to the prosecutor's request or not. And second, again, it depends on the cooperation and that being full. And so we're not there yet.
All right, a lot to still watch with this. Angela Cinadella, thank you for your time and insights as always. We appreciate it. Shocking new video shows the deadly shooting of a Kentucky judge. Police say the man you will see with the gun was the county's sheriff. This video, it was shown in court today, and we want to warn you, it is disturbing. The footage, it has no audio, and we are only going to show you up until the point the former sheriff raises his gun to the judge. The video shows then Sheriff Sean Mickey Stein standing next to District Judge Kevin Mullins. Steins then draws his gun. The judge raises his hands. Several shots are fired. The video itself, it is only 24 seconds long. NBC News correspondent Adrian Broaddus picks it up from there.
Ellison, the video is not only graphic, but it is violent, and it was tough for those inside of the courtroom, including those who love Judge Kevin Mullins. As the video was played, there was an audible gasp in the courtroom, and those sitting behind the prosecutors looked away, some folks crying. On the other side of the courtroom, sitting directly behind the former sheriff, was his wife and daughter. His wife covering her eyes as the video was played and also crying as well. The motive still not revealed, but during cross-examination by the defense attorney representing the former sheriff, more was revealed about what happened in the moments leading up to the shooting. Take a listen.
I was told that Sheriff Steins had tried to call his daughter, and he had tried to call his daughter from the judge's phone also.
And have officers confirmed that the sheriff's daughter's phone number was on Judge Mullins' phone?
Yes.
And that was the lead investigator with the Kentucky State Police Department you just heard from. He also testified saying there's no evidence indicating this shooting was pre-planned. We do know earlier in the day, the judge, the sheriff, and other members of the community had lunch together. A witness told investigators the judge allegedly said to the former sheriff, "Would you like to discuss this matter in private in my chambers?" What that matter is was unclear. Meanwhile, the former sheriff, Mickey Steins, has been charged with first-degree murder. He has pleaded not guilty. The judge has referred this case to a grand jury. That grand jury will determine whether or not to indict the former sheriff. Allison.
A popular TikTok creator is being held in a Texas jail in connection to the murder of a therapist in Louisiana. Tyrone Ishmael Thomas goes by Mr. Prada on TikTok. He has over 4 million followers online, and police say he was the last person seen driving a stolen car after the murder of a therapist whose body was found in a tarp on the side of a highway. Thomas was arrested on charges related to damaging property, resisting an officer, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. He is not facing any charges related to the death right now, but a lot of questions here. So Maya Eaglin joins us now on set with more. Maya, this is an odd case because this is a huge influential person on TikTok. It seems like there's some connections, or at least a location that maybe he was near where the victim was, but it's unclear right now if they actually know each other, right? Walk us through this.
Yeah, it's unclear. There's a lot of gray area right now because it's so early in this investigation. Police are saying that Thomas is a person of interest in this case, but they haven't directly said if there's a connection with the victim, William Nicholas Abraham, who was a 69-year-old therapist in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Police found his body on Sunday with blunt force trauma to the head, and on Monday, they labeled Thomas as a person of interest because they say he was the last person seen using the victim's car. When they tried to arrest Thomas, he actually fled the scene and somehow ended 400 miles away in Dallas, Texas, where he was taken into police custody. But if you look at his TikTok today, a lot of people are asking questions, speculating how this all happened, and some people even commenting on his behavior and mental health. Let's take a look at some of those clips.
Don't do anything drastic unless you want to look like this. Life is a prison. Get me the out. Like, I just woke up yesterday. I looked at the ceiling. I said,
So again, some concerning behavior there that his audience members are pointing out, but we still do not know what the direct connection is to the murder crime.
Okay, and do we know right now if they had a relationship prior to this? Have police said anything?
Police haven't said anything. We do know that the Dallas Sheriff Department confirmed that he was arrested in Texas, but they actually told us that this case is being turned back over to the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Department. There, as you mentioned, he's been charged with 3 things already: aggravated criminal damage to property, resisting an officer, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. But again, we are waiting to hear if there are any direct connections and charges to the murder, which we just don't have that information just yet.
All right, Maya Eaglin, thank you. Up next, what sparks the deadly Maui wildfires? We get information about what residents and officials in Hawaii have to stay. Stay with us. Welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following. In Northern California, law enforcement officials are still searching for an escaped inmate. 39-year-old Caleb DeWare was last seen at the Plumas County Jail on Friday. Officials say he broke through multiple fences and fled to a nearby store. Authorities are warning residents DeWare is dangerous as several agencies assist with the manhunt. And in San Diego, the city council has officially asked the federal government to declare a national emergency at the Tijuana River. The sewage crisis in the area has lasted for decades, with toxic contamination flowing across the U.S.-Mexico border, plaguing residents and workers alike. The city now hopes to secure federal funding to finally address the issue. And in L.A., the parents of 3 teenagers turned their children into police. At least 14 different 7-Eleven stores in the city have been robbed in flash mob-style burglaries since July. Last week, police released images from some of the incidents, and it seems the parents wanted to hold their own children accountable. The teens were arrested and then released, while prosecutors say they were looking at the evidence. More than a year after Hawaii's deadliest wildfire, we now have an official cause: accidental. Maui fire officials saying in a new report that the fire started around 6:30 in the morning last August 8th, sparked by broken power lines that became re-energized. The extreme toll of that: more than 100 lives lost and countless structures destroyed. One of the deadliest wildfires in U.S. history. Steve Patterson joins us now from Los Angeles. He was one of the first correspondents for NBC News on the ground there. Steve, you did amazing reporting at the time, just relentlessly telling the stories of those communities impacted by this. Walk us through what we know in this report right now.
So part of the storytelling is what happens now. And part of what's new about this reporting is in the word that you said earlier, which is rekindled, reignited, because there has always been a debate about whether or not there was one fire or 2 fires. And that's important for a number of reasons. First of all, obviously, this fire sparked the morning of August 8th. It then started to spread, but firefighters were on scene rather quickly. And based on their accounts, they entirely put the fire out. Like, the fire was gone by the afternoon. It then started again. And that fire is what swept in Lahaina, killing more than 100 people, forever changing, really, the state of Hawaii. The delineation, though, was in whether or not that fire had rekindled and restarted, or was there a separate fire? Obviously, it comes from broken Hawaiian Electric Power Company lines. The reason why the narrative they wanted, essentially, was 2 fires is because it's possible, if there was 2 fires, that maybe that second fire was started from a different ignition source. According to what we heard today from the county, from the ATF, that is not the case. This is the same fire. The fire started, the fire was put out, the fire then rekindled because of some debris or something that was still on the ground, on the surface there, where there was very incredibly bone dry brush. There was miles of this stuff all over the state. It then caught that, ignited by this, these hurricane force winds, swept into that community, killed so many people forever, again, changing the landscape of the state. The power company has released a statement saying that they feel obviously terrible for the fact that part of their operation is what started that initial ignition, and that they're obviously fully cooperating with federal investigators as this continues. Meanwhile, of course, there are dozens of lawsuits, not only at the power company, but the county, but the fire department, police department, everybody that's really contributed to trying to put the fire out was sort of blamed initially for not responding adequately. There was this response that, people expected when they heard from the National Weather Service that there would be these incredibly strong winds specifically on this day. There was an Attorney General report not too long ago that specifically looked at this to say that there wasn't enough done when they heard this news to really help out on the day. And so we have the resulting report and the release of what is called the cause of the, obviously, the ignition here today. Allison.
And Steve, while we have you, because you did spend so much time on the ground in Hawaii, in the community of Lahaina and others, as all of this was happening, and then even later going back, staying in touch with people, I'm curious if we could have you sort of just reflect on what this report might mean for people in that community. As you're laying it out, I'm thinking to myself, we can say something's accidental, but that doesn't mean it's not negligent, too. Is this going to be healing for people in that community, or does it just lead to more questions?
It leads to more questions initially, but it also leads to some form of closure, because before this, there was no cause. Like, anytime anybody has something tragic happen, they want to know why exactly happened. Is there someone to blame, which this report, by the way, doesn't do. We should be very clear about this. It doesn't assign culpability, criminality, none of that. That may come later, of course. That doesn't sort of dissuade people from that sort of conclusion. But I think people just want answers. And this is one of those answers. It's not necessarily the most comforting answer to know that this was a power company, that people tried to put it out and that it reignited and took so many lives. But it's one answer in a sea of so many questions that people had for more than a year. People did not know what the cause of ignition was, and now they do. So it's something, Ellison. It's not everything, but it's something.
All right, Steve Patterson, thank you for your relentless reporting on this story. We really appreciate it. Okay, before we go, it is time for the future of everything. Ammunition available with the push of a button. It's not quite as simple as it sounds, but one company is trying to change the way gun owners buy bullets. Stay tuned. Welcome back. It is time now for the future of everything. Normally, when you think of vending machines, candy or chips probably come to mind. Well, now in some southern grocery stores, you can get both of those things out of a vending machine, along with some bullets, too. Ammunition is the latest product being offered at the push of a button, and not everyone is sold on the idea. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson has more.
Cereal, eggs, and now in rural grocery stores across the country, something new is popping up, so-called bullet vending machines.
People hear vending machine and ammo, and in their mind, they're seeing, an old style with the ones with the turns, and it's going to drop a candy bar or a bag of chips to the bottom. We don't call these vending machines. We call them automated retail machines.
Grant Majors is the man behind the automated retail machines found in 8 stores across Alabama, Oklahoma, Colorado, and where we are in Canyon Lake, Texas.
Online, there's really no regulation whatsoever. We verify an ID 100% every transaction.
The minimum age to buy any ammo on Majors machines is 21, higher than the legal age of 18. Guardrails that he says could reduce tragedies.
The average age of school shooting is about 17 years old. Right? The gentleman that attempted assassination of Donald Trump was 20. They could not have bought from our machines.
So I have my ID and my credit card, and we are going to try to buy some bullets here. After acknowledging I was over 21 and not in distress, I chose my bullets. Let's do a handgun round. And it was time to check out. I have braids now. I didn't have braids in my ID picture, so we'll see if it works. Then I stepped into the camera's view and followed the instructions. Okay, it worked. And my bullets are vending. So, yep. Sure enough, I was able to buy a box of bullets.
I'm a gun owner. I'm licensed to carry. I'm not sure I would agree with just anybody being able to walk in and buy something like a Dr. Pepper, but...
These women not swayed by the machine's safeguards.
You're supposed to scan your ID when you use it, and it's supposed to make sure you're 21, and he says it's super secure.
And when I was growing up, you were supposed to be 21 when you bought booze, but I was in a bar every weekend.
What do you say to those folks who would like to see human oversight in this process?
That's really the situation around ammo in the industry, period. If you're buying online, there's no human oversight. At the store level, if you have a clerk checking someone out, are they capable of just looking at a person and knowing their mental state?
The reaction has been mixed. We found a divide along gender lines.
Heck, to be honest, it's probably a little more regulated than buying it over the counter.
As long as it's legal, why not?
So here's the grocery store that machine is in, and let's take a little walk. About 25 steps away, there's the school. Why here?
The store owners and the managers wanted it here, for one. I mean, they wanted it here. There's a hardware store right across the street from the school that sells ammo. It's sold ammo there forever and a much less safe capacity.
Ultimately, it may be up to the customers to decide whether these machines stay or go. In Tuscaloosa, one was removed amid public outcry. Major says he took it out due to low sales. Do you see a time in which we could see these in a big city like a Houston or a Dallas or even a New York or an LA?
I don't foresee a time when we'd put them like in an inner city environment. We're clearly not out there trying to put one in every corner. I mean, that's not the idea of our business.
What is the idea?
We really did see a safer opportunity to change the ammo industry. We see an opportunity to use technology to take a social responsibility direction with the selling ammunition, but protecting the Second Amendment for law-abiding gun owners that, have good intention.
Priscilla Thompson, NBC News.
And that does it for us tonight. I'm Ellison Barber. We will see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.